Horizon Gents, one was your reaction, and this is the problem with the Middle East borders by the channel RealLifeLore. Yeah, why they are not made probably. I think after the Ottoman Empire, they were broken apart. I guess that caused the issue and created a crisis. I think I saw in World War I videos somebody mentioning that. So I don't know detail about this, so it's gonna be fun. I've created quite a few real life lore videos already. If you haven't seen them, check out the cars as a playlist I created for it. Check out the link in the description too for all the other videos. Check out the end cards, I guess. And if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. And this is a real life lore video, so it might get blocked, so I have to put checkered box there, but I guess we'll see. Okay, so let's watch this one.
This video was made possible by CuriosityStream. Watch a full-length, exclusive companion video to this one on Nebula, which you can access by signing up for the CuriosityStream Nebula Bundle deal for just over $1 a month at curiositystream.com/realliflore. This region of the world goes by many different names, but the Middle East or Western Asia are the most common ones that we hear in the English language. Whatever you want to call it, it's an enormous place. When excluding Russia, the Middle East is bigger than the rest of Europe is. And just like Europe, it's an amazingly diverse place.
I like how this is. This is Himalayas. These are the other mountain ranges. And India and Pakistan is just there because it wasn't part of the Asia. It got slammed into it long ago. So you can clearly see there's a literal geographical border there.
The Middle East isn't just this monolithic thing that a lot of people in the West seem to think it is. It has huge divisions between different religious beliefs, big separations in different ethnic groups, and big divides in languages and dialects. Not to mention the massive difference in the location of
What was that? Was that Dodge Ram or something? Damn, we don't get pickup trucks here. Bigger and things like that. We have Isuzus and things like that, but not proper big pickup trucks like F-150 and Silverado, things like that.
Strategic resources like oil and gas that make some areas wealthier than others. In many ways, the Middle East is really similar to Europe or any other big global region, but it's very different in at least one critical way that all of us are acutely aware of. For most of our lifetimes, the Middle East has been incredibly unstable and violent. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but part of it has to do with how the Middle East borders are drawn. Here they are normally on a political map of the world, but seeing the borders like this doesn't really help to explain why they're not very good. Here they are placed instead over a religious map, where you can clearly see that in a lot of places they just don't match up very neatly. Places like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen are sharply divided between Sunni Muslim and Shia Muslim majority areas, while Saudi Arabia and Iran, in contrast, are much more solid. Switch the religious map out for an ethnic map, and you can again see that a lot of these same places just don't match up very neatly.
Yeah, I understand now what the problem is. Basically, in Islamic religion, Shias and Sunnis that do different type of cultures that constantly as war each other, I think. Right? I'm pretty sure that's right. And they're spread out, and the borders does not represent that. That causes issue, I guess. But then again, how can you represent here? I mean, it's a mix, right? Oh, wait a minute. Is this just... This is ethnic map. So yeah, this is... Okay, this is empty. Or is this... I don't know. It's confusing. But yeah, if the colors are the only ethnic groups, then this is fine, I guess. This means it's empty. There is an issue somewhere. There are... Yeah, so they could have drawn borders knowing, which ethnic group is where, I guess. So yeah.
In this view, Syria and Iraq remain divided between Arabs and Kurds, along with even more divisions in Turkey, Iran...
It's not empty. One is Arabs and one is Kurds, okay.
...and Afghanistan. And finally, let's switch out the ethnic map for a linguistic map, and specifically, a map of the various dialects of Arabic. Each of these regions is essentially a separate community inside of the greater Arabic world, and I want to point out a few important things to take away from this map. First of all, the entirety of Egyptian Arabic is fully located within the country of Egypt. This is very similar to Moroccan Arabic being almost entirely located inside of Morocco, and Algerian Arabic being almost entirely located inside of Algeria. The entire linguistic communities in all three of these examples are pretty much all located within the borders of an actual real country, and that's partially why they're all a bit more stable. But in a lot of other places in the Middle East specifically, just like like with religion and ethnicity, the political borders of countries rarely line up neatly with the communal linguistic borders. The Iraqi, Levantine, North Mesopotamian, Gulf, and Najidi dialects of Arabic are all spread out across multiple countries, while Iraq, Syria, and Jordan are basically dialect mosaics. So, if most of the political borders inside of the Middle East don't line up with religious, ethnic, or even linguistic realities, then what are they actually there for? And why were they decided upon that way in the first place? The answer is, of course, because they were designed that way on purpose by people from outside of the Middle East in order to maximize the levels of chaos and unrest as much as possible. This is the problem with the Middle East.
Wait a minute, that was the intention? I thought it was ignorance, like they just draw the map without, knowing much like how we should do it. He was intentionally did that. Why would you do that? What's the end goal of that, man?
East's borders. Allow me to explain from the beginning. Prior to the 20th century, nearly the entirety of what we know today as the Middle East was ruled by the Ottoman Empire for centuries. The oldest border in all of Asia, and naturally the Middle East, dates back to this time period, modern-day Iran's western boundary with Iraq and Turkey. This border was settled upon back in 1639 between the rival Ottoman and Safavid Persian empires as the boundary between their realms. But it wasn't exactly perfect. Mountains are a fairly common and easy way to mark clear divisions between peoples, empires, and countries, and this border generally sticks to that rule until it gets to the province of Khuzestan, inside of modern-day Iran. Geographically, Khuzestan is on an open plain west of the mountains that make up the rest of Iran's western border. Ethnically, the majority of the people who live there are Arabs and not Persians, which was of little concern in the 17th century when it was decided it would belong to Persia by a Turkish and a Persian empire. But it's been a great concern in the 20th and 21st centuries with the rise of Arab nationalism and identity. But even worse, the Turkish and Persian mapmakers could have never predicted the main cause of the future conflicts that placing Khuzestan east of this border would generate.
Oil. I don't understand that. If they were Arabs, and it even makes sense because of the mountains, why would you put that in Persia? What was the reasoning behind that? I mean, it would have been easier to say, you know what, there are already mountains, then these people are already ours, so this is part of Arab. Why not?
Khuzestan is absolutely loaded with oil. It's so oil-rich, in fact, that just this single province alone generates 57% of all of Iran's entire oil production, which means that controlling it today is absolutely vital for the Iranian economy.
Let me guess, there must be millions of military equipment right there just to defend it. Iranian military equipment.
To function, despite it being a primarily Arab province. The conquest of Khuzestan and the annexation of the Arabs and the oil located there were the prime reasons why Iraq invaded Iran in the 1980s, and the retention of that oil was the main reason that Iran effectively fought to the death in order to defend it. But Shia Arab Khuzestan, being on the Shia Persian side of the border, is far from being the most problematic of the Middle East's borders. Later on in the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire made the foolish decision to join the Germans in the First World War, and by 1918 it was obvious that war was lost. The empire that had once spanned the entire Middle East was collapsing, and the victors were eyeballing all.
Yeah, what if Ottomans never aligned themselves with the German and actually aligned with the Allies? How different things would have been right now? Would Ottoman Empire would have still existed today? Maybe the countries would have been, split somewhat, but it might have been still called Ottoman Empire. I don't know, man. What would have happened if they allied themselves with the Allies rather than the, Germans and Austrians? I think Alternate History Hub, that channel, probably made a video about that. I have to check it if they did or not.
All of its land like it was a free-for-all Black Friday sale at Target. Germany, accused of starting the whole war, only lost about 15% of her territory in the peace deal at Versailles. But the Allies initially planned on basically taking over almost 100%.
The way he said it's so funny. All Europeans say, ooh, this is mine, this is mine. Okay, you can take that, this is mine.
Of the Ottoman Empire's land. The British were going to take over all of this stuff, the French were going to take over all of this stuff, the Italians were going to get all of this stuff, Armenia and Greece were going to get some token land tossed their way too, an independent state of Kurdistan for the ethnic Kurds was being discussed.
What's that video? I don't know, something, about this. Was it World War I video? I don't know, where Greece like, oh, I should join too. Everybody like, oh, shut up, Greece.
Istanbul was going to be ruled by an international government, and whatever was left of Turkey itself was basically just going to be confined to a rump state here. Now obviously, this is a lot, it's extremely harsh, and the Allies overplay their hand a little bit. The treaty that set these borders was signed by Turkey, but never ratified, and when the severe terms became public, the Turks became enraged. The Turkish government literally revoked the citizenships of their representatives who signed the treaty, and then went on to fight a 3-year-long war of independence against the Allies, before finally emerging victorious and in a better position to renegotiate. A new treaty was signed, and this time ratified, that largely established the borders of the modern-day Republic of Turkey. The European powers were pretty much kicked out of Turkey itself, but all of the lands that the Ottomans once controlled outside of modern-day Turkey's borders were pretty much relentlessly pillaged. In a secret treaty signed in 1916 while the war was still going on, the British and the French agreed to divide the Middle East between themselves. The British were to gain Mesopotamia, Palestine, and Transjordan, while the French were going to take over northern Syria and most of the Levant. The boundary between their colonies was drawn here and became known as the Sykes-Picot Line, after the British and French diplomats who signed the terms. This boundary between the old British and French colonies in the Middle East pretty much still remains largely intact today, over 100 years later, as the border between Iraq and Syria. And we all know how problematic that's become in the past decade. The Sykes-Picot Line was...
Yeah, so basically, that's what happened. Europeans basically, this is mine, and did that thing, and that is causing the Middle East crisis. Is that it? Of course it is.
Simply a device to separate British and French interests in the region, and was never meant to be used as something beneficial to the people who actually lived there. As a consequence, it largely cuts across various communal dialects of Arabic and has divided linguistic communities between two countries for over 100 years now. But the rest of the colonial borders that the Europeans came up with here were arguably much worse. Iraq's borders were drawn to keep Shia and Sunni Arabs as well as Kurds all locked together in the same state. The Shia make up the majority of the country and control nearly all of the oil in the south. But despite this, the minority Sunni dominated the Ba'ath Party that ruled Iraq from the 1960s until the fall of Saddam in 2003. The borders of Syria were also drawn in a way by the French to wedge the Shia and the Sunni Arabs as well as the Kurds all together into another divided country. And despite being the minority, the Alawites, an offshoot of Shia Islam, have effectively ruled the entire country for the past 40 years now. Despite being mostly Arab ethnically, Lebanon was also designed to keep the Sunnis, the Shias, and the Christians all sharply divided inside of the same country.
I still don't understand why they did that. That feels really petty. Why would you do that? Why they deliberately did this to, keep conflict there or something?
All of these divisions were intentionally established by the British and the French in order to keep the people who lived there divided amongst themselves, so that they couldn't ever unite against their colonizers. The British and French would eventually leave, but the borders they drew that kept communities divided and separated remained. It should come as no...
See, Americans are basically saying, let's talk about peace in Middle East, and so does European Union. But I think, everybody should just, tell British and French, like, this is your shit. Do it, making peace in Middle East is your shit now. Because they did this deliberately. What the hell, man? I didn't know that. This is new information. I thought it could have been ignorance, but it was deliberate. Come on.
No surprise then that the Middle East has been particularly volatile in the years since. Iraq's invasions of Iran and Kuwait under Saddam were all about unresolved border disputes like the Arabs and oil in Khuzestan and the Arabs and oil in Kuwait, which had remained a British colony until the 1970s that Iraq always insisted should have been given to them. The Lebanese Civil War of the 1980s, the Syrian Civil War of the 2010s and 2020s, and the rise of ISIS conquests across the Sykes-Picot boundary have all been fought over the poor boundaries between different religious, ethnic, and linguistic communities that the British and French drew all that time ago. And this is why the borders in the Middle East are so terrible. They were drawn to be terrible on purpose, and the consequences of those decisions are still seeing colossal ramifications and loss of life today. Recognizing this, some geopolitical theorists have drawn up borders of what a hypothetical redrawing of the Middle East's borders in the future might end up looking like. This map, created by Columbia University, gives us a glimpse into how tensions and unrest in Iraq and Syria might shatter the countries into 4 brand new states that follow the religious, ethnic, and linguistic lines a bit more realistically. In this hypothetical scenario, there would be a Shiite Arab state in the southeast, an Alawite Shiite Arab state in the west along the Mediterranean, a Sunni Arab state in between both of them, and an independent Kurdish state in the north. Only time will tell if the Middle East will ever...
Yeah, actually, that would be better. That would at least ease the tension if they are separate countries at least. Because right now it's just horrible, man. All the people living there constantly. Syria, I mean, you know, Syria. What was that video? I saw the video where they saw how one city was completely destroyed, looked like a ghost town. I think that was from Syria, and it just happened one day. People were there. People were living inside the city. It wasn't like given warning like there's going to be something, everybody evacuate or something. No, people were living in this dense, packed city and bombarding everything started. Right now it's a ghost city, so probably lots of people died, kids and everybody. That's just horrible when I imagine that. Imagine the scenario of all happening. This is just horrible. And you know, British and French did this just because they, you know, everybody's at each other's throats, so nobody could, you know, oppose them. Really? Come on, man. That's really petty.
Ever see a massive political redrawing of the map like this. But there's one really big, really obvious part of this whole story that I've so far been leaving out. And that big part is Israel and Palestine. Look, I know how making videos on YouTube works, and I know that this video already has a really, really high chance of being demonetized and underpromoted by YouTube's algorithm.
I don't understand this. Why YouTube does that? What's wrong with you, YouTube? I mean, what's wrong with talking about real life issues? This is educational stuff. This is informative. This is actually happening. This is not RealLifeLore's views. He is stating facts here. Why does that get demonetized? I don't know. I'm pretty sure this video didn't get demonetized, or maybe it did. I don't know.
But once I begin talking about Israel and Palestine, it's a guarantee that this video isn't getting promoted to any of you or ever getting monetized. But I still really wanted to make a super detailed video anyway that was just as long as this one explaining how the Israel-Palestine border situation is the most complicated and controversial in the world. And so instead of uploading that video to YouTube, I've uploaded it exclusively to Nebula instead, which, as you've probably heard by now, is...
Jared Kushner didn't solve that? Huh. Okay. Alright, so that was the problem with the Middle East borders. Yeah, there was lots of new thing I learned here that, you know, I always thought that all the borders either is historic, like, you know, there was, you know, long ago there was some countries and that made the border, or if anything, the borders were after World War I video I saw that Ottoman Empire was split like that by Europeans. I'm like, maybe it was the ignorance. They didn't give much thought to it and it caused the issues like that. But it was deliberate. That is just effed up. I had no idea about that. I had no idea it was deliberate. That feels so petty to me. I think it's British and French responsibility to, you know, solve these issues. Alright people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe, check out the reaction, this link in the description, check out the cast for the playlist, check out the end cards, and yeah, I'll see you next time.